Welcome to Wine Soundtrack International. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Alison Levine, and today I'm with Sebastian Beaumont of Beaumont Family Wines from South Africa. Welcome, Sebastian, and tell us about Beaumont Family Wines, where you're located, and what you're doing.
Sure thing. We, as we say on the label, we put family wines on there. We're from a small little appellation, kind of southeast of Cape Town, about an hour outside, called the Bot River. Otherwise known as the Bot Riviera, as we like to call it. It's a pretty rough little town, so when you come and visit, there's nothing Riviera-like in it. But it's a cool little place, and I've grown up there. I was born there, and my parents bought the property in '74. It was an old wine farm, so we've blessed with a lot of history attached to it. The property was originally set up in the 1730s as an outpost of the Dutch East India Company. So they set it up as a supply farm for travelers. They probably had some wine on that farm at that time, but there's no record of it. And then two Lithuanian families had the property in the 40s, and they started the wine business and back in that time. And unfortunately, they stopped making wines in the late 60s, but gave my parents a chance to buy the property and replant it. And then my mother, who's an artist and kind of, she trained as fine art. She didn't know much about winemaking, but she knows how to cook. And out of pure desperation, she decided to start making a bit of wine commercially. And obviously, when you do that, it's super easy to sell in the beginning. And we had a lot of fun. And then we started to make a bit more, and the challenges really started to come through on how to run a wine business, how to develop your brand and get it out there. So it's been quite an intense journey, and yeah, I'm loving it. I'm part of it. My wife is part of the business now, and my sister-in-law. So we're a proper family operation.
Wow! And what's your total case production?
We're doing in 12 bottle cases, about just over 10,000 cases.
And what are the various varieties that you work with?
Of course, I'm a Chenin Blanc specialist.
Of course, as you should be.
Yeah. No, my father planted a whole lot of different varietals in the 70s and the 80s. And so we kind of left with a legacy of that. And in our area, at that time, there weren't any other producers producing wine. So the early 90s, with the kind of opening up of South Africa, saw a whole expansion of our area in terms of wine production. That's the area is known as the Walker Bay, or otherwise the great area is the Overberg, but it kind of covers areas like Hillmanada Valley, Stanford Valley, and then further down south, Elam and these kind of areas. So in 93, when we made our first bottles, there was literally only 2 other wineries bottling wines in our area, and now there are 80 different wineries. And I decided to specialize in Chenin Blanc as a white variety. So Chenin, for me, I was sitting with 2 fantastically old Chenin vineyards that my father had planted, and there was some great potential to make something really interesting out of it. And we make unwooded Chenin as well. But I've still got 16 different varietals on the farm. So yeah, I've got the whole Bordeaux spectrum. I make a wine named after my sister. I obviously make Pinotage is probably our other wine that we're most known for. But I have a love for Syrah and Mourvèdre, and I kind of think that in the last 20 years we've kind of figured out what works really well on our property. So Chenin, Pinotage, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and then a blend of those. So that's the kind of the focus.
And what's your total acreage or hectares?
In hectares, we're at 31 hectares at the moment. Planted. I've got a little side business. It's apples and pears to keep the cash flow going. So I do that, and we got some beautiful old almond orchards, and so the farm has kind of still got a bit of a mix of different things, but that keeps me entertained, you know.
And where are your wines found?
Traditionally, we started off selling quite a bit of. We've always sold a strong amount in South Africa. We always believed that people from home must talk about the wines before anybody else. I think you need that basis you need your local support, and so that's always been a good part. And then I have a fantastic friend in Germany who's popped in at the farm about 20 years ago, totally by chance, and we kind of developed a friendship, and he's my biggest export customer, you can call it that, but he's a hotelier who just has a passion for my wines. And then obviously we kind of trying to get into the States. We are in the States, so it's here, but it's it's a big country. It's 50 different countries, 52. Sorry for those other two, but it's part of kind of where we want to grow our business. It's an important part to visit.
So, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
I think just grapes. Like growing up on a wine farm, being covered in sticky Chenin Blanc grapes on the back of a trailer we were taking to the cooperative. That was my kind of fundamental memory. My parents were interesting. They're quite an arty, hippie type family. My father was very unconventional, and we were always taught or given wine as part of our kind of everyday life, so there was a little glass on the table every day. Whenever we wanted to have some, that was part of it. I remember my parents used to drink box wine at that time, it's like those, go camping and then have a big box. The wine, there was always lots of wine. We used to get an allocation every year of wines from the KWV because we sold grapes to them. So they used to drop off like a whole lot of boxes of muscadels and sweet wines and red wines and white wines. And it was always there's always interesting stuff around. So, yeah. So
what's the first memorable wine you drank? And do you remember the occasion?
Yeah, for sure. I think there was a profound wine, was a Moulin Touché 47 that I had. I worked in a little wine shop in Cape Town. And the owner had a group of lawyers coming around she was obviously entertaining them. And I was just the skivvy working in the wine shop and pouring all these wines. And I remember tasting this wine, and it just blew my mind. It was totally one of those memorable moments, you can't forget them.
Traveling the world abroad, what would you say is one of the best foreign wines you've drunk? Aside from the one you just spoke about.
No, I'm just trying to think I think Randy Dunn's the other day were not just one wine, it was his whole lineup, and it was his whole approach and philosophy. I was like, I didn't expect it from a Californian producer to produce those kind of wines. My friends here had all kind of tasted his stuff, so I knew a bit more about it. I went in as completely first time, and that's a very recent memory, but it'll be one that stays with me for quite a long time. I think it was an impressive lineup of his from 89 through to 2012 Cabernets. And there was some, especially in the 90s, some of his wines were just absolutely incredible. And I have a long-term battle with an old friend of my father who's a controversial but deeply passionate wine drinker. And he's always on about low alcohol and why have we lost our direction? The world of wine has lost its kind of roots and its origins because of ripeness. He's very, very much against. And so listening to Randy the other day, it kind of reminded me of him. So that was fundamental.
If we were to go into your cellar at home, if you have one, or maybe your refrigerator, I don't know, what would we find in there?
A mixed bag of local South African wines. You'll find quite a bit of Riesling around. I'm a bit of a Riesling freak, so I quite like Riesling from Germany, especially from the Mosel. There's quite a few of those around. There's obviously quite a bit of Chenin from the Loire, and from, mostly I have wines that I find that somehow have a connection to the place. So either I've met the people or I've become friends with the people that are, I think of Vincent Carême from the Loire. He's a good guy. He's now making some wine in South Africa. And, wine is more, for me, is more than just what's in the bottle. I think it's also about a kind of an emotional connection to the place or to the people that are making it. So I think that's important for me.
Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No. Silly question.
You have to ask it.
I love all grapes. I would love to make wine in the right place with all varietals. I think there are varietals that suit certain places. Riesling is a great example. I think it's a varietal that you need very specific sites and soils for it. So it's a very harsh illustrator of that kind of reality. But I think there's nothing I wouldn't drink. It's really, I love all styles of wine, and I love all varietals, all blends. I really don't have I think life would be very silly just if I shut myself down to one style or one type of wine.
And what is your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I think they serve a purpose in terms of giving people. There's a lot of wine in the world, and I think it gives an indicator. I'm not a naysayer of anything like that. I think it's what people must remember is that it's an opinion of somebody's taste, and never to ignore their own taste in wine. I think that's and my father was very strong about that. He says, you don't apologize for your own taste. It's your taste, and what somebody else tastes in a wine and what they see in it is their opinion. And obviously it's important to get some kind of recognition outside of your own efforts, and so that's where wine critics and the kind of press have a role. And it's about telling a story about your country and about the wines that you make and the philosophy of your approach to it, and that's important. I think trying to communicate it.
And as a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
Oh no. I remember red, white, or no. I drink them all. It's I'm not a big rosé drinker. I'm also not a big bubbly drinker. I'm not a beer drinker, so I don't like beer much. So
you might be the only winemaker who doesn't drink beer.
Yeah, I might be. I don't not drink it, but it's really not my preferred drink. I think I like white wines a lot. And I love making them. I find the delicacy in a white wine, the challenge of trying to get that finesse and elegance into it is really something that I enjoy.
And how do you approach wine and food pairings? Do you feel there are rules to follow, or what do you look for when you're selecting a wine to go with your dinner?
Yeah, I think my wife's a chef, so we have quite a serious and we obviously love food. I love food that's true to the ingredients. I think the killer on a lot of wine pairings is the sauce, is the kind of seasoning of the food. You can have a beautiful piece of fish with a red wine, so it doesn't have to follow traditional routes, but I think you have to follow the kind of, you have to have respect for both parts of the meal. And so trying to get that right is always a challenge. It's an exciting challenge, and I think you should keep an open mind to it. But I think one of my best food and wine experiences of my own wines was scallops, and they weren't done in a traditional way. It was in Germany with a Syrian restaurant, and they'd seared this beautiful fresh scallops and in a kind of a Middle Eastern spice, and it was just absolutely exquisite for barrel fermented Chenin. So it was one of those moments.
Wine Soundtrack International, the voice of wine producers from around the world.
So for someone who hasn't been able to taste your wine, I've luckily had that privilege. What do you think they're missing out on?
I think obviously we've been on this journey through the States and trying to expose our wines to the drinkers out there. What are they missing out on? I think as a style, I'm not trying to knock your head off with my wines. I'm trying to give you a wine that captures a place, expresses where they come from as much as possible in a kind of purity of varietal character. And I think that you're missing out on South African wines if you're not trying them. I think that's the first thing. So don't be scared about trying them. They're there, and we don't bite, not like a lion, So I think people must just engage and keep an open mind, and don't be. I think in the talk earlier, one of the guys was talking about your preconceived ideas of what South African wines are, and sometimes people are caught up by wines that they've drunk in the past, and I understand that it changes your perception. It's hard to turn that ship, but we just keep trying them. My wines are more elegant and kind of fresher in style than some of the kind of traditional wines from South Africa, so I think that's what I'm trying to do.
Vintage. Let's talk about vintage. How much do you see a variation from year to year? Or do you see more similarities? And are there certain signs or omens that you look for that will predict what a harvest is going to give you?
Yeah, so I've spent my my first years really working in the farm, in the vineyards. And I think with vintage variation, you can start getting an idea. So for me, it's really important to be there in spring. And that's your first indicator of what's going to happen, how the vines are budding, how even they are. That will give you an indication. Then your flowering time is the next phase, which kind of will say, okay, you've either got a decent crop or a very light crop, and managing your vines according to that is critical. We have vintage variation, but they're not as extreme as in Europe. We're kind of, especially in our area, we're kind of Mediterranean climate. We're close to the sea, about 11 kilometers away, and that has a moderating effect on our climate. It doesn't make it super, super hot or super cold. But there is a subtle vintage variation, and I think if you take just Hope Marguerite as a wine, if you take the even years from 14 to now, they're the kind of more classic vintages, a little bit more delicate and not as powerful maybe as the odd years, which are 13, 15, 17, and even 19, looking at it just coming out of barrel, we're just finishing the ferment in 19. They're kind of a bit more broader and kind of textured. It's not always the case. I thought 19 was going to be the changing year from the routine, but it's actually not, surprisingly. So we'll see how but there is vintage variation, but in South Africa generally it's not a massive issue. I think the variations happen with winemakers moving around more than they should be. We should stick to a place and get to know it, and focus on it. And that's one of my I recognize it as an absolute privilege, to have grown up on a property, worked with the same vineyards that were there from when I was a kid, and understand it. I understand every part, every corner of my farm in detail. I know exactly what's happening, where I can expect certain things to happen. If there's a bit of disease around and I want to see where there's an indicator of it, I know which road to go to in my old Chenin vineyard to get that indication, and if it's there, I can see it and I know what to do and react to that. So
knowing your vineyard so intimately, do you ever find that you talk to them?
Absolutely.
And what do you say to them?
I try and do exercise around the farm, and I go for a run every now and then, but my run's always got a pruning shear or something in my pocket, and I look at the vines and I'm like, I love the vineyards that I work with. And if I say anything to them, I think they talk more to me than I say anything to them. I try not to get too anxious about it, because we got everything on the line, our family depends on the business working, and if the grapes are not there, then it's a real issue. And this 19 crop was a bit like that. We had a very light crop, especially on the reds, and that was this funny conditions in October, which at the time I should have recognized it, and there was a very unusually dry period right in the flowering of the vines, and normally my pear trees are my indicators, and they indicated, but I didn't listen to them and I didn't pay attention, so I missed that. And I think that's one's got to be around. It's important to be in the market, but it's also important to be very close to your farm and to the vineyards that you're working with. So,
Absolutely. So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A firefighter. No, didn't we all? I always spent time on the farm in my holidays and at school, after school. I actually wanted to be a marine biologist. That was I love the sea, so I could live under the sea. Tells you a little bit about who I am. I think there's a crab somewhere named after me.
And so then you found yourself in wine, and when you're not running through the vineyards, what do you do in your free time? What do you do for fun?
I've got 3 kids and a beautiful wife, so I have to spend some time with them as well. But my wife and I celebrated our 15-year anniversary, and the first time I took her surfing was not a very good experience, and it took her 15 years to get back onto a surfboard. So now we try and do big surfing holidays with all the kids, and so the surfing is another passion of mine, and something I love to do. It gives me good time to kind of clear my head. And while being on this trip, we went to Aspen, and I dragged the guys off to go and catch a few trout in the river. So fishing is also my other therapy, my other water sport, exactly.
Anything with water.
Anything with water, anything that keeps me away from too many people is pretty much sums me up.
So you just celebrated, you said, congratulations, your 15th anniversary. For a romantic evening with your wife as a chef and you as a winemaker, what are the wines that you're going to be pulling out for that romantic evening? Or what did you pull out for the 15th anniversary?
15th. We went to a fantastic restaurant in Cape Town called La Colombe. It's like one of the top restaurants. And we had a full-on wine food pairing menu. And they actually poured sneakily one of my wines blind, which I kind of thought maybe it was mine. I was 100% sure. But we had a fantastic lineup. It was all South African stuff. There was a beautiful Pinot from the Newton-Johnson family. They make a really great Pinot. I love sweet wine, so that's my other little Achilles heel. And so there was a sweet wine, a Chenin sweet wine from the Molyneux. So that was a treat. But yeah, those kind of things. I think, wine and food are not separated, and a meal like that, we just love experiencing it. It was a little bit on the kind of dainty, kind of prissy side. It's not exactly the way we do it, but we love to try new stuff. My wife actually spent quite a bit of time in India learning how to make curries, and that it's one of her specialities. So we like spicy food, and there's quite a bit of that in Cape Town as well.
And I'm sure it goes really well with your Chenin Blanc.
The Chenin's, it's lovely. But a chilled pinotage also works.
What is the best piece of advice you ever received?
Never to be arrogant. I think that was... our family crest says it is because erectus non elatus, which means stand tall but don't shout about it. I'm sure there's some more Latin freaks that'll give you a slightly different one. But my father will interpret it as proud but not arrogant. He also said never to be desperate. I remember in those days of trying to find a girlfriend, he said you need to get rid of the desperate sign on your forehead. So that was pretty good advice, I think.
Well, it worked for you.
It worked eventually, yeah. There were still some desperate moments in between.
If you could give our listeners some advice, what advice would you like to give them?
Keep an open mind about everything in life. It's a journey, and you miss out on too much if you stick too much in your kind of stubborn way of thinking. Don't be stubborn about things, and just let it take you on the journey, and always try and push the boundaries in terms of finding new things to try and do and places to visit and explore. I think that keeps your mind open, and you keep humble and exposed to other people's opinions and cultures. So I think South Africa is such a diverse place and complex country with so many challenges in its day-to-day living that you have to keep a very positive attitude, but I think it keeps you very grounded in terms of, there are a lot of people in our country that have a lot less than what I'm very privileged to have, and it keeps you very humble. No, it should.
So if you imagine this scenario that somebody is sitting at a table in a restaurant and there's a bottle of your wine on that table, and the paparazzi come and they shoot a picture of this person because they're famous from any walk of life. They don't have to be living still. And your bottle is captured in the background. Who would you want that person to be drinking your wine?
It would have been Nelson Mandela. I actually tried to give him a bottle, but his security guard stopped me from getting to. So that was I'm not a huge worshipper of famous people. I just don't think I think everybody deserves as much respect and attention as anybody else. But there are a few people. He was one who I think had such a fundamental influence on the world around us. I'd love to have met him. I don't know what I would have said to him, but I would love to have met him, just to have met him. A really profound person, I think.
And share a bottle of wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
a day without sunshine.
So, looking back at your work, what would you say your proudest achievement is to date?
I think in 2005 I took quite a difficult decision, but instinctive one, to focus our brand on a varietal like Chenin. And at that stage we were making both Chardonnay in barrel and out of barrel and Sauvignon Blanc, and trying to find out what was going on, what would be the best for us to go forwards with. And it was the best decision I made. So to be known and to become a specialist in a certain varietal, I think that was really the one that I'm very pleased I did. It was a stupid idea at the time because it didn't do the cash flow any good, and it wasn't a great business decision, but it was the right long-term decision. I think there are too many wineries, and I'm still in the same situation. We're making too many different wines. I think one needs to focus and try and, if it works in your area, you do best.
So if you were being sent off to a deserted island, what are 3 wines you would take with you?
Well, the first would be an Ikem, for sure.
For the sweet wine?
Yeah, definitely. Or a Moulin Touché if it was nice and old, or something like that. Oh man, that's such a tricky one. I don't know. Probably take a Riesling for the white from the Mosel, because I think those are the most beautiful wines that are produced in terms of expression of the grape. On the reds, Syrah, maybe, I don't know, some from Northern Rhone, something with perfume and balance and deliciousness. Must be a bit older. Yeah, so something like that. I don't know. There's so many wines to choose from.
I know, too hard to pick just 3.
Yeah, it's just a crazy question. You're full of crazy questions.
Well, I have one more crazy question for you. So, there's always a correlation between wine and music, whether people like to play instruments or listen to music or whatever. So absolutely. Just based on some of the wines that you were talking about that you love so much, I'd love you to tell me either what you'd want to listen to or what it makes you think of, stylistically or specifically a song. So let's start with that Mosel Riesling.
I think you have to go with something classical. To mention something specific. But classical would be that kind of Prussian expression of music is just, I don't know, it's fantastic. I think with red wines, I'm kind of more a Waits fan. So for me, I've always been thought about it. I actually invited him to come to a farm and play. I said I'd give him a barrel. He never wrote back to me. I'll keep writing back to him and see whether he ever comes out. He'd stop drinking, so I don't know. But
and the red,
I think that's, I'll do a Waits. Like, there's a great song that he wrote called I'll Shoot the Moon. That would be one of mine. Or Rain Dogs, something like that.
And your Chenin Blanc.
My Chenin?
No barrel.
Nah, that one...
I think the one that you described as your grandmother.
Yeah, I have Marguerite. Geez, I never thought of wine and music with her. She wasn't one thing she wasn't very into music. But I'd probably do something from Miriam Makeba. She is a great musician with a beautiful, silky voice. Cesaria Vora, she's also... Yeah, I'll do another woman who makes
fantastic
silky music. Yeah.
Well, Sebastien, thank you so much for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack. And before we go, if you can let people know your website and can they visit you?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the interview, and it's been fun. We have a website. We don't put much information on the back of our bottles, so you expect it to go there, where we actually tell you, against the trends, everything about the family. So it's www.beaumont.co.za. That's the South African code. And yeah, we're open every day except Sunday. So we're there. You can taste the whole range of wines that I do, including things like Mourvèdre and some interesting little single varietal wines that I make. And we love having people, but you have to make the journey to the Botte Riviera to come and visit. And that's not for the faint of heart. It's a special little place, and you'll get we're not over commercialized, so we have I think a very good experience when you come there.
Well, fantastic. I look forward to coming, and I hope you get lots of visitors.
Thanks very much.
Have a good afternoon.
Awesome to be here. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack International. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.